Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Tuesday topic. Today's topic is potential for harm in the classroom with our speaker, Flossie Ierardi from the Department of Creative Arts Therapies. And now, without further ado, let me throw it over to Flossie Ierardi. Flossie, take it away.
Thanks, Aaron. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen and say welcome. Okay, so it's great to see some familiar names on the screen there, and hoping for some interactions today. And so I'll just tell you a bit about, first of all, I'm Flossie Ierardi. I am adjunct faculty at this point in the Department of Creative Arts Therapies, teaching in the Music Therapy and Counseling program. Here today is Terrence Xu, who is a graduate of the Creative Arts Therapy program and now a PsyD student at Widener. And Terrence contacted me recently because they're on the DEI committee for their department in the PsyD program at Widener. So we got to discussing similarities and what our DEI board does, and so I invited Terrence to be here and maybe do some sharing. And so I also want to thank, I'm a member of the DEI board. I want to thank Dr. Veronica Carey for her support here. And I'm just going to move along and just again welcome everyone. I know there might be some students here, some professional staff, and faculty, and I hope that we can hear from all voices, and also planning a little bit of breakout discussion later. I am white, which has given me privileges throughout my life, and I continue to benefit from those privileges due to structural racism. I am a member of the DEI advisory board, where I have learned so much in my short time since September. I have to say that I think one of my big motivations or inclinations for being here and for choosing this topic is that our students of color in the Creative Arts Therapy department over the last few years have really called for accountability. And in interacting with those students, I really have had to acknowledge that I have caused harm in the classroom. And of course, in my white fragility, that has been difficult, but I'm committed to continue learning. I'm here as a humble learner, but I've also taken advantage of the anti-racist pedagogy series in the Teaching and Learning Center, as well as other Tuesday topics discussions. And really, I've found that I can have time to do that in my semi-retirement. So it's just, I'm just diving into this material right now and have gathered up some literature that I'll share with you. And again, learning together with you and learning about harm. And it's also been a big topic for several reasons in our music therapy profession. So I was also kind of moved by Dr. Carey's words that she has said several times in our meetings and in a presentation, that students of color do not have the same educational day. So this and other material or information that I'll be giving you today is information that, yeah, maybe I knew this before, but really hearing about it and reading about it has just, has affirmed some of my thoughts, but really strengthened my resolve as well. And I know from those of you that the names that I've seen on the screen today, I know that many of us have been working on this at the same time. So this is actually an excerpt from a later slide. And, there's lots of talk about, we have to do and act and advocate as well as read and reflect. But as far as what we can do today, later we'll talk about maybe short-term and long-term later, but now that we're here today, it's towards the end of our day. I would just ask you to reflect upon your compassion for each other, for your co-learners, for students in your courses, for students that you deal with perhaps as professional staff, for their welfare and their professional development. And ask you maybe to drop something in the chat, a phrase or a sentence about why you're here, and maybe reflecting on that. I mean, we're here because we care. We care about our students, and do not want to cause harm. We care about each other. Students care about faculty and each other. So perhaps maybe just a few words in the chat about why you came today. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Katie. Microaggressions happen every day. That's correct, Michelle. And Katie, I share that. I want to do better. Learning and doing better. Yes. Supporting our students. Thank you, Dr. Masood Paul. Thanks. Yep. Thinking about blind spots. To keep learning. Nalini, thank you. Dr. Way, yes. Great. Thank you, Natalie. Yeah. Subtleties, yeah. And I'll tell you that I do some reflecting every day, engaging students without hurting them. Thank you, Diane. I had an experience today in my class where I feel like I may have done that, and the student is here. Managing interactions when students feel harmed. Thanks, Cynthia. Thanks for being here. So the outline today, I'll talk a little bit about psychological safety, but where most of my literature comes from is sources of harm. And in the previous student experience, meaning through elementary, middle, and high school, on a campus, within our curricula, and in the classroom. And again, we have like 50 minutes to an hour to do this, so I'll get through a few things, keeping in mind that these are brief, and the idea that hopefully we can all go on and learn more from this. And just a little bit about cultural humility at the end. So most of the literature that I found and that is presented here refers to the experience of students of color, racialized students, which gives us a foundation of understanding of harm in the classroom. And there'll also be some other brief examples. But to that end, this is from a reading that was shared from the Teaching and Learning Center in their anti-racist pedagogy series. And Dr. Selfa Chu out of University of Texas at El Paso said, race is the door that will take us to a richer discussion of identity and society overall. So that seemed to help in this idea of the foundation. So Dr. Eliane Edwards, I'm sorry, I'm trying to move our pictures, wrote about school safety for Black children, Black students, in the earlier grades. So she conceptualized safety as physical, physiological, emotional, psychological, and social experience with implications for daily functioning and overall well-being for students. And she defined it as the condition of being protected from exposure to trauma and toxic stress. And she tells us that, we'll see about this, but the effects of discrimination for Black students ranging from a very early age in the educational setting. So quickly, I found a couple legal definitions of harm. And we can see that, first of all, impaired psychological functioning, growth, or development of a significant nature. And harm in the classroom is the last thing that we want as educators. We're cultivating the future generations of our professions. And emotional distress, which is synonymized with emotional harm, a highly unpleasant emotional reaction as anguish, humiliation, or fury. And we know that that can result from ongoing microaggressions. And just before I go on, I just want to say that I'm hoping that people will feel free to call out if there's something you want to say. I don't see the chat. Terrence may be able to see the chat and can let me know if I'm missing something. Thanks, Terrence.
So I will let you know if there's anyone talking in the chat. So don't worry about the chat.
Thanks, Terrence. Thanks. So Dr. Nina Brown from Old Dominion is a scholar that I really enjoy, and I use a couple of her readings in our group dynamics course in music therapy. And she actually has expertise in the area of narcissism, has written books about it, but also has written about group therapy. And so narcissistic wounding, and this is from an article about multiple heritages and microaggressions in group therapy. And she describes narcissistic wounding as an injury to the person's essential self, producing rage and other negative feelings about the self and or others. And then, as you see, we've all seen definitions of microaggressions, intentional and unintentional comments, acts, and omissions. And we'll see some examples of microaggressions from qualitative study later on. So just starting here with some definitions. So we're back with Dr. Eliane Edwards, who wrote about, in the younger grades, Black children are subject to racial bias and discrimination as early as pre-kindergarten in their schools. By 7th and 8th grade, we're seeing decreased self-esteem, increase in depression, and decreased academic engagement. As I read this, and I just thought about our actual situation in the school district of Philadelphia, where many schools are actually, there's a lot of segregation in our schools in Philadelphia. As a lifelong Philadelphian, I do read the Inquirer, and Janice Armstrong was writing about the Harriet Tubman sculpture that was outside of City Hall for a while. And this is a quote from her. She would be furious at how so many African American youngsters continue to be educated in chronically underfunded schools that graduate students unable to pass state exams for English, algebra, and other subjects, and how so many Black and brown communities are plagued by gun violence. She wrote this back in January, and again, in our news today, it appears that there were 2 more shootings in Philadelphia of teenagers yesterday, and one of those was fatal. So again, caring about the young Philadelphians and the students who may be coming to Drexel. And again, I'm taking the liberty of reading some of these. I know some of my colleagues are on the phone right now, perhaps driving. So from Taylor and others, this is from a reading about, it's called Social Justice Syllabus Design, which I believe was floating around our department. And Taylor and others wrote about it, and they actually wrote about the undergraduate STEM experience of students of color. And so it just also felt relevant to me for the past couple of years as I've been working on making my syllabi more inclusive. but they describe the campus and institutional experience of students of color as being a kind of a shift from something that's more communal, maybe more collectivistic, to something that's more like majority middle class, individualistic, independent, meritocratic, hierarchical norms. And so there is this culture shift, and students find ways to cope that may again affect their academic success. So Williams and others, this was a qualitative study done in the Pacific Northwest and Southern Midwest. But obviously there are 36 students of color in 3 predominantly white institutions were in focus groups. And Williams and other authors, and these are in my reference slide, identified 15 categories. And I'm going to just share a few with you, about 7 of them. But things that we may know about and that we know can be happening in white supremacist environments, which are everywhere, and just in our systemic and systematic racism. Assumptions about intelligence, competence, or status. Believing that people of color are criminals or more dangerous. Again, the myth of meritocracy, or that race is irrelevant for success. And then pathologizing minority culture or appearance, and that's been in the news more around hair discrimination. Other students trying to connect via stereotypes, so they might make racist jokes or speak in certain ways, feeling like they're showing affection, and yet it's harmful. Environmental exclusion, so exclusion of literature, decorations, depictions, and even faculty of color. And then the opposite with environmental attacks, decorations, statues, building names that might be insulting to a person's cultural group or heritage. We know that certain statues can just be reminders of oppression. So I'm kind of channeling Dr. Carey here. In one of her presentations, she spoke about the college dropout rate. This is from the U.S. Statistics and Data of 2021, actually, where 46% of Black students completed their degrees, compared to 67% of white students, which is basically a 54% rate of dropout. The other another concept that Dr. Carey shared from Claude Steele, a scholar around stereotype threat, the threat of being viewed through the lens of a negative stereotype or doing something that might confirm that stereotype. So when we think about, let's say, psychological safety in the classroom, a student of color is dealing with stereotype threat, with those ideas that people might view them as dangerous or look at them in certain ways. I guess it would be that white gaze, and this just takes attention away. Or perhaps for some students, they kind of have to censor what they say so that people don't find out about their identity, their sexual identity. These are all things that kind of take up space in our brains and really do take away from our academic success. Okay, I realize I'm moving a bit fast through the slides here. Just I should be taking a breath if anyone wants to say anything. I think, again, we may be back at Taylor here. That's right. Keep moving our pictures around. So Taylor, again, this was from Social Justice Syllabus Creation. Just some more information from them. They talk about invisibility. So when students of color don't see faculty or other students of color, again, that can happen in our predominantly white institution. In our music therapy program, there have been times that there have been no students of color in our small classes. Haynes, who I will get to in the next slide, Dr. Shayla Haynes said that white faculty make up 75% of instructional faculty in the academy. So she was talking as a whole. That's a very big number. That's a very big majority, and can feel very oppressive. But this results in the feeling of lack of validation of one's ethnic and racial experiences. And our textbooks and other course materials, what are the voices there? Who are the writers? And again, this doesn't help with the feeling of belongingness. And then students will have difficulty approaching faculty when they need support. And they also talked about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. So the idea with a fixed mindset is that intelligence is a trait, and they value, with a fixed mindset, performance over process is valued, or product over process. And a growth mindset implies that intelligence can be developed. So sources of harm in the classroom, and going back to Dr. Haynes, I believe. Sorry, I'm not just trying to move our picture so I can see all my print. Dr. Shayla Haynes did a survey and interview study. I believe this was out in Colorado, and this was an undergraduate school. They were all from one college. So she surveyed faculty and then interviewed some of them. But these are some themes that she found from the white faculty. And shout out to Michelle Radigan for sharing this article. Just really a good one. And it's called Susceptibility of Teaching to White Interests. So a white faculty person might have this false assumption that colorblind approaches promote inclusion. And in some ways, I think maybe on a musical level, or specifically on a musical level or a drumming level, there were times that I felt like that. If I use musical material that is applicable to everybody, then we're all good. And so I've been working hard on that. But what happens is that students, international students, students of color, learn to assimilate in order to participate. And again, look what that does to their identity. Or dismissing microaggressions. So one of the faculty actually said to another student, "That's so gay." And at that time, that was an expression that meant that's like so not cool. And yet that faculty person didn't want to confront the offending student. And I guess not really thinking, more concerned about that student rather than the receivers of the microaggression. So then remarks like that become acceptable in the classroom. And then here's where I can really, confess that I have been and try very hard not to now, guilty of avoiding discussions of race, either because I've just been uncomfortable with it, and we know that we need to lean into these uncomfortable conversations. But several years ago, I would just have a hard time with that, or feeling like in 10 weeks I have so much to do, I can't talk about this, and yet it's relevant all the time, especially to healthcare professionals. Okay. There is, a whole slew of other literature about harm in the clinical setting. And then difficulty incorporating those discussions with the course material that we have. If we have course material that day, perhaps a chapter in a textbook, or some model or approach that we're trying to teach, and how do we incorporate this? And I've found that students have a wonderful way of doing that. Our students, especially, I've seen in the music therapy program and the creative arts therapy program that students are really hungry for these conversations. So I'm just checking the time a bit. Okay, we have a pretty good amount of time here. So sorry. I wanted to mention some additional examples, and again, where I have made mistakes, and I do a lot of reflecting about this. But pronouns, I'm often either forgetting or I'm just on a roll and talking, and might mispronoun a person, and that's harmful. What am I including? Who am I including in my readings and course materials? And I'm having a big challenge with that right now in the course that I'm teaching, in that a lot of the literature around it is written by white European authors. And so I'm actually going outside of music therapy literature a bit, and using other kinds of materials to bring in different voices and highlight different strengths and health. Disability is something, of course, we think about universal access, but I've also thought about our students, again, in behavioral health programs where we teach about, from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. And we do have students sometimes who have perhaps a generalized anxiety disorder, substance use disorders, bipolar disorder. And here they are in these classes where they're learning about these same disorders, and what is that like? And are they censoring themselves? Do they feel unsafe to talk about it? I added regional here. That's usually another, variable around multicultural issues. And we have students once in a while, and I can only think of two in my experience because maybe they don't mention it, but who have been from very rural settings. And my experience is totally Philadelphia, even my clinical experience. And so a student a couple of years ago really encouraged me to learn more about that, and to not ignore that in our coursework. Classism is sometimes an issue for me, as growing up as a sort of a working class person with parents who were not highly educated, but thinking again about the poverty in Philadelphia, just the economic situation in Philadelphia, who can't even make it to our classrooms because they can't afford it. But also thinking about, even within our classrooms, who's going to the conference and who can afford it and who can't. And that's been an issue as well. So just, again, something that I keep reminding myself about. And then international students. In a second, I'm going to ask Terrence to say something about it. But I know that, again, for myself, I sometimes speak fast in my Philadelphia accent. I sometimes speak in colloquialisms to be funny, and not keeping in mind that it's just kind of meaningless to international students. And especially, I haven't even mentioned cultural appropriation here, but we talk about it all the time in the Creative Arts Therapy program. So that's another important topic. And so Terrence kindly agreed to give an example, or even two, or to kind of represent the student body here. Talk a bit about an international student experience that you had, Terrence.
Yeah, thank you, Flossie, for inviting me today. And hi, everyone. So I guess before that, I'll just introduce myself a bit. I'm Terrence. I'm from China, and right now, this year is my 9th year in the United States. It's been a long time. So one of the experience I'm thinking right now is let's call it like a classroom incident that happened. I think I believe it was my second year. Um, yeah, at Drexel, and at that time I was probably it's my fifth year in the United States. So I had my undergrad in the United States, but it was in a liberal arts school in a very small town in Michigan. Um, so I was pretty, I guess, bubbled in that culture of college, of liberal arts college, where I was at for 4 years. Um, so, um, yeah, so that was a class that was talking about the using of electronics and like electronic instruments or tools in music therapy. And the professor was like having this creative idea of like giving some bonus point in the beginning of the class. Um, so the way he did it was to give some different questions relating to music. It could be like guess the instrument that was played in this little section, or guess the title of the song, or the musician of the song that is played in this like like pretty like 20-second section. um it is a very good intent because it's for extra point, like everybody needs extra point. And um but like it soon enough for me, um I realized that I can't really get those extra point because the the questions are pretty leaning toward this Western oriented music culture. So the instruments that was played, it was more like instruments that are used in the orchestra, like in symphony, like all those kind of um, musical instruments. And the music that was played, it was more 50 to 80s famous music in the United States. Um, Probably so. Okay, so I started to feel not comfortable with that, and I was started to communicating with other. There's another international student in class as well, and she was also feeling like, I don't know what's going on. I don't think I can get the extra point, and maybe we just don't know enough, and we should study harder, and like we just, like that's what the career is needed from us, so we should study harder. And um like we started to go that route. But as I start to think more and more, I feel like I don't think that's all on me. um I feel, first of all, the music, the bonus point questions does have a more westernized approach to it. Even though it is just extra point, it still should be inclusive enough for everyone. Um, so it took me a couple class to actually feel comfortable enough to bring it up to the professor. So I said something like, I don't feel these choice of music or instrument or questions are that inclusive, because they are more Western oriented, because they are more music or instruments that are in that Western aspects. So the professor replied to me saying that no, like these are the music that should be known around the world. And that is the thing that really hit me. Um, I immediately just started feeling that sense of furious in my heart. And the instant thought was like, around the world, like, I guess I'm not part of the world. Like, I'm not from this part of the world that you're defining. Um, so I, I had no word after that reply, and I just turned to silence, because I don't know what to say. Um, so that is the incident, and
What now, Terrence?
mm,
Can you say how it was somewhat resolved?
yes, yes.
Okay, sorry.
So yeah, um, I at that point I don't feel I could comfortably discuss with that professor. So I actually went to Flossie, and both me and the other international student, we were there like having that conversation with Flossie and described what happened, and um, how, like, what is, like, how the things it is from our perspective. Um, and then I wrote an email to the professor, um, basically explaining that what is that question of me coming from, and why I don't feel um it is a what is the word, an appropriate response from him. And
Mhm.
I think I do need to talk to him more, and I do need him to see that it is not our fault that we don't know the answers to the questions. Um, and yeah, I don't know if I think probably Flossie have talked to that professor as well, and the professor did respond pretty quickly, and was like, to me it feels like he is able to see it, and see what I am coming from, and the other international student is coming from as well, and like, um, how he like had made a mistake, and should not have not acknowledged that it is like not every part of the world listen to the same thing or using the same instrument, um,
Mhm.
and um, yeah, and we did have a meeting and discussed about it, and
So that
yeah.
was pretty brave on your part, Terrence. That was pretty brave to approach the instructor, and also it sounds like the instructor. I remember his email response, and he did learn a lot from that situation, as did I. I did too. So thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you for listening.
So just again, that was very valuable, Terrence. And maybe we'll hear from some other students later. But I just wanted to bring up the idea of cultural humility that I do want to keep reminding myself. This is from an article in the Journal of Transcultural Nursing, and they wrote a conceptual analysis of cultural humility, and just some bullet points that they acknowledge that, of course, we know it's a lifelong process, but these ideas of openness, self-awareness, egoless, supportive interaction, and self-reflection and critique, which I find that I have to do constantly. So these are just some ideas that I gleaned from the literature, some right out of Nina Brown, and other literature, Haynes, Edwards, Taylor. But what do we do when harm occurs in the classroom, whether a faculty person, whether it's from the instructor, whether it's student to student. And this is kind of about ways that faculty might respond, but that we can all, again, learn from. And I won't read out each one at this point, but I would like to stop share. We could just either hear maybe of other student or faculty. I mean, I shared a lot of my experiences. Um, Student experiences are always helpful. Professional staff experiences are helpful. But just if you'd like to put something in the chat or perhaps just call out or questions.
Michelle said in the chat, allow yourself to be comfortable. So important, not getting defensive. Accept it.
Yeah, that getting uncomfortable part, I think, is what trips me up or has tripped me up as a faculty member, is knowing I make a mistake and then making the mistake of over apologizing, and then it winds up centering myself again. And so just, obviously apologizing, but then not centering myself and being okay with being uncomfortable that I just messed up.
Yeah.
And not being on the defensive, because it's not the person who I've harmed. It's not their job to make me feel better that I made a mistake. And I think that that's where a lot of learning needs to occur, especially, and I can speak for myself as a white person, that's where white people need to unpack it a lot, which is why in our Creative Arts Therapies department, we have a white racial affinity group where we unpack it. And I highly encourage, if you don't belong to one, to start one, because it's so important to have that space where you're not burdening other people with your white stuff. I'm censoring myself. I'm not saying the other S word.
Right. But that's so important, Michelle. And, again, guilty about like over apologizing sometimes. And I will learn from what you just said. Thank you.
Hi, Flossie and
Dr. Way, hi.
hi everybody. Thank you for this session, which is really important. And for me, being an African American woman and an instructor, it's so important. Some of the things you've pointed out, the microaggressive behaviors, and even the narcissistic behavior. And I think one of the things that has helped me, and I think part of my values and beliefs and how I was raised, we were raised, treat everybody equally and the same. In my family, and people, are just not aware. And not just being aware of the cultural differences and the values and practice of people from different ethnicity. And for me, just learning it and growing and being, again, from a very large household, from African American culture, both parents born in Savannah, Georgia, and we, came here for us to live here in Philadelphia. And I really didn't really see this racism and discrimination, I think, until like I was in high school. And then, just seeing how people perceived you and treated you. And I would say, wow, why am I being treated that way? And, as I've gotten older, it just was because of the color of my skin. And people just wasn't, again, I'm thinking, going back to this, how people are brought up in family and values and practices. But what I've learned through the years is this understanding culture, where people are from, and becoming knowledgeable. And again, this is a space where people really, quite a few, just don't like to talk about or don't know how to talk about. So I really appreciate it. And then just listening to Terrence, you come in, I always try to put myself in that person's place. And I'm thinking, wow, you've come a long way. You've all the way from born in China and you're here in the United States. So, when I had attended community college and listening to the different stories from where people came from, it just really hit a light bulb. And I'm like, wow, it's so interesting. But I think that the key is just beginning to have the conversation and then just recognize it. What can I do to be, become more knowledgeable, become more educated about that person, where they come from, respecting them. And I think another key point, which you have enlightened us with, is this: everybody was not born in that one area from that same socioeconomic
Right.
place. And I think that's another piece where people have to understand, if you were fortunate enough I'm just going to say, if you're fortunate enough to attend Drexel or one of the elite colleges, that's great. But you have to respect those people from different ethnic backgrounds. They may not have been fortunate enough, and just try to understand and learn where they come from. What can they bring to the table, and accept it. And again, just being knowledgeable, educated, and just continue the conversation. But I think the big piece is reflect,
Yes.
as you said before, self-reflection.
Yes.
Really look at yourself and say, okay, how can I learn? How can I grow? What do I need to do to make myself better? And I've tried to emulate that as a role model in the classroom, and giving students every opportunity to talk about their culture, talk about their experience. I've learned it just helps me to be even more knowledgeable about learning about the diverse population that we have here at Drexel.
Right.
Mhm.
And how enriching that is. Thank you, Dr. Ray. Yeah, self-reflection, very important. And learning about and respecting others' worldviews is, thank you so much. That's a great reminder. This is our continuation. I'll just say this very quickly, and then Terrence is going to close out with some words for us. So we did the first part, and so an example of what you can do in the short term. Again, this is kind of addressing faculty, but examine a syllabus or policy for review of inclusivity. Something you could do the next few days or the next week. What voices are you highlighting, and is it a collaborative environment? And in the long term, to just, as I'm doing, just making this commitment to keep learning about anti-racist pedagogy and white supremacy in our lives, and cultural humility. I do have a reference slide here. The DEI board just has great opportunities, which Darren mentioned, and in 2 weeks, Michelle Radigan and others will be presenting again. And the Teaching and Learning Center just has wonderful stuff as well. So in closing, I've asked Terrence to read this so that, for the benefit of those on the phone, but that we can all experience these words together, from Kenneth Jones and Tima Okun.
Thank you, Flossie.
Mm-hmm.
Understand that discomfort is at the root of all growth and learning. Welcome it as much as you can. Deepen your political analysis of racism and oppression, so you have a strong understanding of how your personal experience and feelings fit into a larger picture. Don't take everything personally.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So I just want to express appreciation to Dr. Carey and the DEI board, to Darren, Terrence, and all the many who shared today, and for your attention. And Steve Sergowski, who is somewhere in the wings. Thank you, Steve. I didn't know you'd be here. So Darren, I think that's it. Oh, and there's the references, which are very tiny, but they'll be in the...
Thank you all for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you all at next week's Tuesday topic or another one.
Okay, thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Yeah.